What if I told you that ignorance isn't just a personal failing, but an infectious disease that spreads through society like a virus? What if the smartest people you know are already infected, and they don't even realize it? Think about it. In the last 5 years, you've probably watched brilliant doctors share medical misinformation, respected engineers fall for obvious scams, PhDs with decades of research experience suddenly believing conspiracy theories that a 10-year-old could debunk. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Intelligence doesn't make you immune to stupidity. In fact, it might make you more susceptible. If you value content that challenges your mind and forces you to question what you think you know, subscribe to this channel right now. Because thinking together is the first step to resisting the epidemic of willful ignorance that's sweeping through our world. Hit that notification bell, because this is exactly the kind of content that algorithms try to bury. Let me paint you a picture. Salem, 1692. 20 people executed for witchcraft. But here's what history books often miss. Many of the accusers weren't uneducated peasants. They were respected members of the community, church leaders, successful merchants, people who could read, write, and run complex businesses suddenly believed their neighbors were flying on broomsticks and making pacts with the devil. Fast forward to 2016, Pizzagate. A man with a college degree and a stable job drove hundreds of miles with an assault rifle to investigate a child trafficking ring, supposedly operating out of a pizza restaurant basement. The restaurant didn't even have a basement. But Edgar Madison Welch wasn't stupid in the traditional sense. He was a father, concerned about children. He could hold a job, drive a car, use technology. Yet he fell for one of the most absurd conspiracy theories of the internet age. Or consider this. Researchers found that false news stories spread 6 times faster than true stories on Twitter. Not because they're more believable, but because they're more emotionally satisfying. The lies that spread fastest aren't the clever ones. They're the ones that make us feel smart, righteous, or part of something bigger than ourselves. This isn't about politics. This isn't about intelligence in the traditional sense. This is about something far more dangerous, the human capacity for self-deception, and how it spreads through networks of otherwise rational people like a cognitive virus. Today, we're going to explore why the smartest species on Earth keeps falling for the dumbest lies. We're going to understand how ignorance becomes contagious, why your brain actively participates in its own deception, and most importantly, how we can build immunity against viral stupidity. Because make no mistake, in an age of information warfare, your mind is the battlefield. Let's start with the definition that might make you uncomfortable. Self-deception isn't just lying to yourself. It's the art of believing your own lies so completely that you forget you're lying. Psychologists have been studying this phenomenon for decades. Leon Festiner, the father of cognitive dissonance theory, discovered something fascinating. When our beliefs conflict with reality, we don't change our beliefs. We change our perception of reality. Here's how it works. Your brain receives information that contradicts something you already believe. Instead of updating your belief, your brain experiences what Festiner called cognitive dissonance, a kind of mental pain. To relieve this pain, your brain has 3 options: change the belief, dismiss the evidence, or rationalize why the contradiction doesn't matter. Guess which option your brain prefers? The easiest one, dismissing the evidence. But self-deception goes deeper than simple bias. There's something psychologists call functional ignorance. The strategic decision to not know something because knowing would be emotionally or socially inconvenient. Think about climate change. We have overwhelming scientific consensus. The evidence is clear, measurable, and reproducible. Yet millions of intelligent people choose functional ignorance because accepting climate change would require changing how they live, work, and vote. It's not that they can't understand the science. It's that understanding would be psychologically expensive. Or consider financial bubbles. Before the 2008 housing crisis, thousands of smart investors, economists, and regulators had access to the same data showing that housing prices were unsustainable. But acknowledging the bubble would have meant missing out on profits, admitting mistakes, or taking unpopular positions. So they chose not to see what was right in front of them. The most insidious part: once we commit to functional ignorance, our brains work overtime to justify it. We seek out information that confirms our chosen ignorance. We avoid sources that might challenge it. We surround ourselves with people who share our blind spots. This is where self-deception becomes viral, because ignorance doesn't spread randomly. It spreads through networks of trust. We're most likely to adopt false beliefs from people we like, respect, or want to be like. Your college roommate shares a news article. Your trusted colleague mentions a theory at lunch. Your favorite influencer makes an offhand comment. These aren't strangers trying to deceive you. These are people in your social network, people whose judgment you value. And when they share misinformation, it comes pre-validated by your relationship with them. The result is what researchers call epistemic bubbles, information environments where false beliefs can flourish, because they're never genuinely challenged. Not because the truth isn't available, but because we've unconsciously structured our information diet to avoid it. Here's the terrifying part. The smarter you are, the better you become at rationalizing your functional ignorance. High intelligence gives you more sophisticated tools for self-deception. You can construct elaborate logical frameworks to justify ignoring inconvenient truths. You can find expert opinions that support your preferred beliefs. You can poke holes in evidence that threatens your worldview. Intelligence without intellectual humility doesn't make you wise. It makes you a more dangerous fool. In 1951, Solomon Asch conducted one of the most disturbing experiments in psychology. He showed people a simple task: match the length of a line to one of 3 comparison lines. The answer was obvious, a child could do it. But here's the twist. Asch planted actors in the room who deliberately gave wrong answers. And something remarkable happened. When surrounded by people confidently stating incorrect information, 75% of participants gave at least one wrong answer. They literally doubted their own eyes rather than disagree with the group. This is the power of social conformity, and it explains why stupidity spreads faster than wisdom. We like to think we're independent thinkers, but the truth is more unsettling. Humans are social animals who evolved in small tribes where being ostracized meant death. Our brains are hardwired to prioritize social acceptance over individual accuracy. When everyone around you believes something, your brain interprets dissent as a threat to your survival. Not consciously. This happens at a deeper, evolutionary level. The same neural circuits that once helped our ancestors navigate tribal politics now make us vulnerable to mass delusion. This is why cults work. This is why financial bubbles inflate. This is why entire societies can suddenly embrace obviously false beliefs. It's not that people become stupid. It's that the social cost of buying right becomes higher than the intellectual cost of being wrong. Consider the phenomenon of preference falsification, identified by economist Timur Kuran. This is when people publicly support beliefs they privately doubt, because they think everyone else genuinely believes them. The result is a cascade of public lies that nobody wants to break. Take the Soviet Union. For decades, millions of people publicly supported a system many privately questioned. Each person thought they were the only doubter, so they stayed silent. The system appeared to have universal support, which reinforced everyone's decision to remain quiet. When the Berlin Wall fell, the world was shocked by how quickly support evaporated, but the dissent had been there all along, hidden by the fear of being different. This same dynamic plays out in corporate boardrooms, academic institutions, and social media feeds. People share content not because they verified it, but because sharing it signals group membership. Challenging popular falsehoods risks social isolation. So truth-tellers self-censor, while lie spreaders gain confidence. From apparent consensus, modern technology has weaponized this ancient vulnerability. Social media platforms show us what's popular, not what's true. They amplify content that generates engagement, and nothing generates engagement like righteous anger or tribal identity. The result is what researchers call informational cascades, situations where people ignore their private information and follow the crowd, leading to collective errors that become self-reinforcing. Everyone follows everyone else, and nobody follows the evidence. But here's what makes this particularly dangerous in the digital age. Our tribes are no longer limited by geography. We can now find communities of like-minded people anywhere in the world. This means our natural tendency toward conformity can be satisfied by increasingly extreme groups. If you believe vaccines are dangerous, you can find thousands of people who share that belief. If you think the earth is flat, there's a community for that too. The internet doesn't just spread information. It amplifies confirmation bias by making it easier to find people who will validate whatever you want to believe. And once you're in these communities, the social pressure to conform becomes intense. Questioning group beliefs risks losing your entire social support network. So people double down on false beliefs not because the evidence gets stronger, but because the social cost of doubt gets higher. The most chilling part: the people spreading these false beliefs aren't malicious. They're often genuinely trying to help. They share misinformation because they care about their friends and family. They want to protect people from what they perceive as threats. Their intentions are good, but their impact is toxic. This is how stupidity becomes viral. Not through malice, but through misguided love. Here's a statistic that should terrify you, according to MIT researchers, who analyzed 126,000 news stories shared by 3 million people. False news spreads 6 times faster than true news on Twitter. But here's the part that should really keep you awake at night. This wasn't because false news was more believable. It was because it was more emotionally engaging. The truth is often boring. It's nuanced. It requires context. It doesn't make you feel smart or righteous or afraid. Lies, on the other hand, are crafted for maximum emotional impact. They make you angry, outraged, or supremely confident in your worldview. And emotions spread faster than facts. Social media algorithms have turned this human weakness into a business model. These platforms don't make money when you're informed. They make money when you're engaged. And nothing keeps you engaged like content that triggers strong emotional responses. Every time you like, share, comment, or even just pause to read something, you're sending signals to an algorithm about what captures your attention. The algorithm learns that controversial content keeps you on the platform longer. Nuanced, thoughtful content that gets buried because it doesn't generate the same level of engagement. Think about the last time you saw a reasonable, balanced take on a controversial topic go viral. You probably can't remember one, because it doesn't happen. Moderation doesn't trend. Outrage does. The result is what researchers call algorithmic amplification of extremism. The platforms designed to connect us are actually pushing us toward more extreme versions of our existing beliefs. If you're concerned about vaccines, the algorithm shows you increasingly anti-vaccine content. If you're worried about politics, it feeds you increasingly partisan takes. This isn't a bug, it's a feature. These platforms are designed to be addictive, and addiction requires escalation. The content that satisfied you yesterday won't be enough to capture your attention tomorrow. So the algorithm keeps pushing boundaries, showing you more extreme content to maintain your engagement. Facebook's own internal research, revealed by whistleblower Frances Haugen, showed that their algorithms actively promote divisive content because it generates more engagement. They knew their platform was spreading misinformation and increasing polarization, but they prioritized growth over truth. If this analysis is making you think differently about how information spreads, hit that like button. It helps YouTube show critical thinking content to more people who need it. But the problem goes deeper than just algorithmic bias. These platforms have created artificial social environments that trigger our worst cognitive instincts. When you post something on social media, you get immediate feedback in the form of likes, shares, and comments. This creates a dopamine feedback loop that rewards content based on social approval, rather than accuracy. The result? People start crafting their beliefs to maximize social media engagement, rather than truth. They share content that makes them look smart, informed, or morally superior to their followers. Accuracy becomes secondary to social signaling. And here's the really insidious part. The people who are most confident in their false beliefs are often the most likely to share them. Psychological research shows that incompetent people are not only more likely to make mistakes, they're also more likely to be confident about those mistakes. This is called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and social media amplifies it perfectly. The people who know the least about a topic are often the most vocal about it online, while experts stay quiet because they understand the complexity and nuance involved. The platforms also create what researchers call context collapse, the removal of social and temporal context that normally helps us evaluate information. In real life, if someone tells you a shocking story, you can consider their credibility, their mood, their motivations. Online, information arrives stripped of context, making it harder to evaluate critically. A tweet from a teenager carries the same visual weight as a tweet from a Nobel laureate. A meme created as a joke can be shared as serious news. A comment made sarcastically can be interpreted literally by people who don't know the original context. This context collapse makes us vulnerable to manipulation because we can't rely on our normal social cues to evaluate information. Everything looks equally credible on a screen. So we fall back on emotional resonance and social validation instead of critical thinking. The tech companies know this. They've spent billions of dollars studying human psychology to make their platforms more addictive. They know exactly which cognitive biases to exploit to keep you scrolling, clicking, and sharing. Your attention is being harvested and sold to the highest bidder. And the highest bidders aren't always interested in your well-being. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. When was the last time you chose not to know something because knowing would force you to act? Maybe it was avoiding checking your bank account when money was tight. Maybe it was not Googling symptoms when you felt sick. Maybe it was not researching the environmental impact of a purchase you really wanted to make. This is emotional self-deception, and it's more common than we like to admit. Sometimes ignorance isn't bliss, it's survival. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist, identified something he called loss aversion. We feel the pain of losing something twice as intensely as we feel the pleasure of gaining the same thing. This means our brains are constantly working to protect us from potential losses, including losses of our cherished beliefs. When information threatens something we value, our identity, our relationships, our sense of security, our brains treat it like a physical threat. The same neural pathways that make you flinch from a hot stove make you avoid information that might force uncomfortable changes. Consider climate change again. For many people, accepting the reality of climate change would mean acknowledging that their lifestyle, their career, maybe even their entire worldview contributes to a global catastrophe. That's psychologically expensive. It's easier to find reasons to doubt the science than to face the implications of accepting it. Or think about financial planning. Millions of Americans avoid calculating how much they need for retirement because the answer would be too depressing. They know they should save more, invest differently, maybe work longer, but not knowing allows them to maintain the illusion that everything will work out somehow. This isn't stupidity. It's emotional self-preservation. The human brain has limited capacity for stress and anxiety. Sometimes we choose ignorance because we're already at our psychological limit. Herbert Simon, another Nobel laureate, identified this as bounded rationality. We don't make perfect decisions because we don't have perfect information, unlimited time, or infinite mental energy. We make decisions that are good enough given our constraints. But here's where it gets dangerous. We're not just rationally ignorant about things that don't matter. We're often ignorant about the things that matter most because they're the most emotionally threatening. The people most likely to ignore health warnings are often those with the highest health risks. The people most likely to avoid financial planning are those who most need to plan. The people most likely to dismiss relationship advice are those in the most troubled relationships. This creates a cruel paradox. The more you need accurate information, the more motivated you become to avoid it. And in our current economic system, this psychological vulnerability has been weaponized. Industries spend billions of dollars studying how to exploit our tendency toward motivated ignorance. The tobacco industry pioneered this approach. They didn't try to prove cigarettes were safe. They just created enough doubt to let smokers rationalize their addiction. They funded studies, promoted alternative theories, and gave people permission to keep smoking by making the science seem uncertain. The same playbook is now used by fossil fuel companies, pharmaceutical corporations, and food manufacturers. They don't need to convince you their products are good for you. They just need to create enough confusion to let you rationalize buying them. Modern capitalism has become, in many ways, a system for monetizing self-deception. We're sold not just products, but justifications for buying products we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like. Social media compounds this by showing us curated versions of other people's lives. We see their highlight reels and compare them to our behind-the-scenes struggles. This creates a constant pressure to spend money we don't have on experiences and possessions that promise to close the gap between our reality and others' presentations. The result is what economists call lifestyle inflation, the tendency to increase spending as income increases, maintaining the same level of financial stress regardless of wealth. People making 6 figures often feel just as financially constrained as people making 5 figures because they've expanded their definition of necessary expenses. This isn't just about money. It's about the broader human tendency to adapt our perceptions to justify our choices. We buy expensive cars and convince ourselves we need them for safety. We live in oversized houses and tell ourselves we need the space. We work jobs we hate and rationalize that we're providing for our families. Each rationalization makes the next one easier. Self-deception becomes a habit, and eventually, we lose track of what we actually believe versus what we've convinced ourselves to believe. The most tragic part: this often happens with the best intentions. We deceive ourselves not out of malice, but out of love for our families, our dreams, our sense of who we are. But good intentions don't make the consequences less real. Let me tell you about some very smart people who believe very stupid things. Isaac Newton, one of the greatest scientific minds in history, spent more time studying alchemy than physics. He genuinely believed he could turn lead into gold and discover the elixir of eternal life. Newton wasn't stupid. He was infected by the intellectual viruses of his time. Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of the hyper-rational detective Sherlock Holmes, was completely convinced that fairies were real. He staked his reputation on photographs of fairies that were later revealed to be obvious fakes. A man who could create the most logical fictional detective of all time couldn't detect deception in his own life. More recently, Nobel Prize-winning chemist Kary Mullis became a vocal AIDS denialist, arguing that HIV doesn't cause AIDS despite overwhelming scientific evidence. Linus Pauling, winner of two Nobel Prizes, became obsessed with vitamin C as a cure-all, making claims that far exceeded any scientific evidence. These weren't isolated cases of brilliant people having one blind spot. These were systematic failures of critical thinking by some of the smartest humans who ever lived. What's happening here? How can someone be brilliant in one domain and completely irrational in another? The answer lies in understanding that intelligence and rationality are not the same thing. Intelligence is your brain's processing power, how quickly you can absorb information, recognize patterns, and solve problems. Rationality is your willingness to change your beliefs based on evidence. High intelligence can actually make you more susceptible to certain types of irrationality. Smart people are better at constructing elaborate justifications for their beliefs. They're more skilled at finding evidence that supports their preconceptions and poking holes in evidence that challenges them. This is called motivated reasoning. And it's more dangerous when performed by intelligent people, because their rationalizations are more sophisticated and harder to debunk. Consider the con phenomenon. Many con believers aren't unintelligent. They're often successful professionals, lawyers, doctors, business owners, who've been convinced that a secret cabal of Satan-worshipping pedophiles controls the world government. They've constructed elaborate theories connecting disparate events, demonstrating impressive pattern recognition and analytical thinking. The problem isn't their intelligence. It's that they're applying that intelligence to false premises. Or look at the Flat Earth movement. Flat Earthers often display remarkable dedication to research and experimentation. They conduct elaborate tests, build detailed models, and engage in sophisticated debates. They're not lazy thinkers. They're applying intellectual effort to defending an absurd conclusion. The same pattern appears in financial bubbles. The 2008 housing crisis wasn't caused by stupid people making obvious mistakes. It was caused by very smart people, investment bankers, risk analysts, regulatory officials, who convinced themselves that housing prices could rise indefinitely. They built complex mathematical models to justify their beliefs, creating an intellectual superstructure around a fundamentally flawed assumption. This is how stupidity becomes viral in educated populations. It doesn't spread as obvious nonsense. It spreads as sophisticated-sounding theories that give intelligent people permission to believe foolish things. The internet has supercharged this process. Now, instead of being limited to local communities, people can find global networks of like-minded believers. A person interested in conspiracy theories can connect with thousands of others who will validate and elaborate on their beliefs. These online communities often develop their own internal logic, complete with specialized vocabulary, complex theories, and elaborate explanations for why mainstream sources can't be trusted. New members are gradually introduced to increasingly extreme ideas through a process that resembles intellectual grooming. The most dangerous part is that these communities often contain genuinely intelligent, well-meaning people who reinforce each other's false beliefs. When a doctor promotes anti-vaccine theories, it carries more weight than when a random person does it. When an engineer questions climate science, other members see it as expert validation of their doubts. The result is what researchers call epistemic tribes, groups of people who share not just beliefs, but entire frameworks for determining what counts as evidence. They develop immunity to outside information by creating elaborate explanations for why external sources are unreliable. These tribes can persist for years or even decades, becoming increasingly disconnected from reality while becoming more confident in their beliefs. The internal logic becomes so sophisticated that members genuinely believe they're more informed than the general population. And here's the most chilling part. Once someone is fully integrated into an epistemic tribe, conventional fact-checking and debunking often backfire. Challenges to group beliefs are interpreted as confirmation that outsiders are threatened by the truth the group possesses. This is how intelligent people become soldiers in the war against reality. They don't start stupid, they become stupid. Gradually, one rationalization at a time, surrounded by other smart people making the same mistakes. So how do we build immunity against viral stupidity? How do we protect ourselves from the cognitive viruses that have infected so many brilliant minds throughout history? The first step is accepting an uncomfortable truth. You are not immune. Your intelligence, your education, your good intentions, none of these protect you from self-deception. In fact, they might make you more vulnerable because they give you confidence in beliefs that haven't been properly tested. This is called intellectual humility, and it's the foundation of all clear thinking. It's the recognition that your current Beliefs might be wrong, that your information might be incomplete, and that changing your mind isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of growth. When was the last time you changed your mind about something important? If you can't remember, that's not because you figured everything out. It's because you stopped learning. Here's a practical exercise. Identify one belief you hold strongly, and spend a week actively seeking out the strongest arguments against it. Not strawman arguments or weak objections, but the most sophisticated critiques you can find. If your belief survives this process, you can hold it with more confidence. If it doesn't, you've learned something valuable. This practice is called steel manning, the opposite of straw manning. Instead of attacking the weakest version of opposing arguments, you engage with the strongest version. It's intellectually demanding, but it's the only way to truly test your beliefs. Second, develop what researchers call epistemic vigilance, a healthy skepticism about information, especially information that confirms what you already believe. The most dangerous lies are the ones that sound like truth to us. Before sharing anything on social media, ask yourself, have I verified this? Do I know where this information came from? Am I sharing this because it's true, or because it makes me feel good? Create friction in your information consumption. Don't just read headlines. Read full articles. Don't just read articles. Check sources. Don't just check sources. Look for alternative perspectives. This isn't about being paranoid or distrusting everything. It's about being as careful with information as you would be with medication. You wouldn't take pills without checking what they are, who made them, and what effects they might have. Why would you be less careful with information that shapes your worldview? Third, diversify your information diet. If all your news comes from sources that share your political perspective, you're not getting news. You're getting confirmation bias with current events mixed in. Follow smart people who disagree with you. Read publications that challenge your assumptions. Engage with communities that have different values and priorities. This doesn't mean accepting everything you encounter, but it means exposing yourself to different ways of thinking. Think of it as intellectual cross-training. Just as physical exercise requires working different muscle groups, mental fitness requires engaging with different types of thinking. Fourth, practice saying I don't know. These might be the 3 most important words for cognitive health. In our culture, admitting ignorance feels like weakness, but it's actually a superpower. When you're comfortable not knowing, you become curious instead of defensive. You ask questions instead of making assumptions. The Socratic method, developed by one of history's greatest philosophers, is based entirely on the power of admitting ignorance. Socrates claimed to know only one thing, that he knew nothing. This wasn't false modesty, it was intellectual methodology. By acknowledging his ignorance, he created space for genuine inquiry. Fifth, slow down your thinking. Most cognitive errors happen when we're operating on autopilot, making quick judgments based on limited information. Daniel Kahneman calls the system 1 thinking, fast, intuitive, and error-prone. Before making important decisions or forming strong opinions, engage what Kahneman calls system 2 thinking, slow, deliberate, and analytical. Ask yourself, what evidence would change my mind? What am I assuming? What might I be missing? This is especially important online, where everything is designed for quick reactions. The platforms profit when you engage impulsively, so they make it as easy as possible to like, share, and comment without thinking. Finally, build relationships with people who will challenge your thinking. Surround yourself with friends who care enough about you to tell you when you're wrong. Seek out mentors who have different perspectives. Join communities where intellectual disagreement is valued over social harmony. The goal isn't to be contrarian for its own sake. It's to create an environment where your ideas are regularly tested and refined. Iron sharpens iron, but only through friction. Remember, the goal isn't to eliminate all errors in thinking. That's impossible. The goal is to build systems and habits that help you catch and correct errors before they become entrenched beliefs. Your mind is the most important tool you own. Isn't it worth learning how to maintain it properly? Individual intellectual hygiene is necessary, but it's not sufficient. We're fighting a systemic problem that requires systemic solutions. We can't solve viral stupidity one mind at a time, when the information environment itself is designed to spread cognitive viruses. So what would a society look like that actively promoted clear thinking instead of profitable delusion? First, we need to revolutionize education. Our current educational system was designed for the industrial age. It prioritizes memorization and compliance over critical thinking and intellectual courage. We teach students what to think, not how to think. Imagine schools that taught media literacy as rigorously as they teach mathematics. Students will learn to trace information back to primary sources, identify logical fallacies, recognize emotional manipulation, and understand how algorithms shape their information environment. They'd practice changing their minds based on evidence. They'd learn that intellectual humility is a strength, not a weakness. They'd develop tools for navigating disagreement without resorting to personal attacks or tribal thinking. Finland has already started moving in this direction. Their educational system includes comprehensive media literacy programs that teach students to identify misinformation, understand bias, and think critically about sources. The result: Finnish students consistently rank among the most resistant to misinformation in international studies. Second, we need transparency in algorithmic systems. Social media platforms currently operate like black boxes. Users have no idea why they're seeing certain content or how their data is being used to shape their information environment. Imagine if platforms were required to show users why they're being shown specific content. You're seeing this post because it's similar to content you've engaged with before. This article is being promoted because it generates high engagement, not because it's been fact-checked. Better yet, imagine if users could adjust their own algorithmic settings. Instead of being passive consumers of whatever the algorithm decides to show them, they could choose to prioritize accuracy over engagement, diversity over confirmation bias, long-form content over viral snippets. Some platforms are already experimenting with this. Twitter has introduced features that warn users before they share articles they haven't read. YouTube has started adding context panels to videos about controversial topics. These are small steps, but they point toward a more transparent and user-controlled information environment. Third, we need economic policies that reduce the psychological conditions that make people vulnerable to misinformation. When people are stressed about money, health, or security, they become more susceptible to simple explanations and scapegoating. Research consistently shows that economic inequality correlates with belief in conspiracy theories. When people feel powerless in their own lives, they become attracted to narratives that promise hidden knowledge or secret enemies to blame. Universal basic income, universal healthcare, affordable education. These aren't just social programs, they're cognitive health initiatives. When people's basic needs are secure, they have more mental bandwidth for critical thinking. Fourth, we need to change how journalism works. The current media business model rewards clicks and engagement over accuracy and nuance. News organizations are incentivized to publish quickly, generate outrage, and confirm their audience's existing beliefs. Imagine news organizations that were funded by their commitment to accuracy, rather than their ability to generate engagement. Imagine reporters who were rewarded for changing their minds when presented with new evidence, not for defending their initial takes. Some experiments are already underway. Nonprofit news organizations like ProPublica and the Marshall Project are funded by donations rather than advertising, allowing them to prioritize public service over profit. Fact-checking organizations like Snopes and PolitiFact are developing new methods for assessing the reliability of information. Fifth, we need to redesign social media platforms around different values. Instead of optimizing for engagement, what if they optimized for understanding? Instead of amplifying the most emotionally provocative content, what if they amplified the most intellectually honest? This isn't just idealistic dreaming. There are concrete design changes that could make a huge difference. Platforms could require users to read articles before sharing them. They could add friction to the sharing process, asking users to confirm they want to spread information they haven't verified. They could promote content from users who have track records of sharing accurate information. The technology exists to build better information systems. What's missing is the economic incentive and political will to implement them. Finally, we need legal frameworks that hold platforms accountable for the information ecosystems they create. Not censorship, that's both impractical and dangerous, but transparency requirements, algorithmic audits, and liability for knowingly amplifying harmful misinformation. The question isn't whether we can build a more rational information environment. The question is whether we have the collective will to do it. Because the alternative, a society where truth is determined by whoever can generate the most engagement, is a democracy's death sentence. These changes won't happen automatically. They require active citizenship, informed voting, and sustained pressure on both technology companies and government officials. The future of human rationality isn't determined by market forces. It's determined by the choices we make as a society. The tools of mass delusion are powerful, but the tools of collective wisdom are more powerful still. We just have to choose to use them. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the psychology of self-deception to the algorithmic amplification of ignorance. from historical examples of viral stupidity to practical strategies for cognitive immunity. But I want to leave you with something deeper than techniques and solutions. I want to leave you with an understanding of what's really at stake here. The capacity for rational thought, the ability to change your mind based on evidence, to hold uncertainty without anxiety, to care more about truth than comfort. This isn't just a useful skill. It's what makes us human in the deepest sense. Every other species operates primarily on instinct and conditioning. We're the only species that can recognize our own cognitive biases and choose to overcome them. We're the only species that can say I was wrong and mean it as a point of pride rather than shame. When we abandon this capacity, when we choose tribal comfort over intellectual courage, we're not just making poor decisions. We're betraying our evolutionary heritage. We're squandering the gift that separates us from every other form of life on Earth. Friedrich Schiller once wrote, "Against stupidity, the gods themselves contend in vain." But I think Schiller was wrong, or at least incomplete. Stupidity isn't an immutable force of nature. It's a virus that spreads through networks of otherwise intelligent people. And like any virus, it can be contained, treated, and eventually defeated. But it requires something that's become increasingly rare in our polarized world: the courage to be wrong, the willingness to hold our beliefs lightly enough that we can examine them honestly, the intellectual humility to recognize that being smart doesn't make us right. Throughout history, the greatest advances in human knowledge have come not from people who were certain they were right, but from people who were willing to discover they were wrong. Galileo overturned astronomy by doubting what everyone could see with their own eyes. Darwin revolutionized biology by questioning humanity's special place in creation. Einstein rewrote physics by imagining what would happen if our most basic assumptions about space and time were incorrect. Each of these breakthroughs required someone to say, what if everything we think we know is incomplete? That question, that willingness to doubt, is more precious than any fact you could memorize or any opinion you could hold. It's the difference between having a mind and being had by your thoughts. The ignorance spreading through our information networks isn't just a technological problem or a political problem. It's a spiritual problem. It's the result of minds that have closed themselves off from the possibility of growth, of change, of surprise. But thinking, real thinking, the kind that changes you, is contagious too. Every time you change your mind based on evidence, you give others permission to do the same. Every time you admit ignorance instead of pretending knowledge, you make intellectual humility a little more socially acceptable. Every time you choose truth over comfort, you strike a blow against the viral stupidity that's infecting our species. The future of human civilization may depend on whether we can learn to think clearly in an environment designed to make us think poorly, whether we can choose wisdom over winning, understanding over outrage, curiosity over certainty. It won't be easy. The forces promoting delusion are powerful, well-funded, and perfectly aligned with our worst cognitive instincts. But they have one fatal weakness. They depend on us remaining asleep, and you're awake now. The question is, what are you going to do about it? So here we are, at the end of this journey through the landscape of human self-deception. We've seen how ignorance spreads like a virus, how intelligent people become carriers of stupidity, and how the very systems designed to inform us often work to deceive us instead. But knowledge without action is just another form of ignorance. Understanding the problem doesn't solve it. It just makes you responsible for being part of the solution. So I want to leave you with a question that might be the most important one you consider this week. What idea are you continuing to believe simply because it's easier than questioning it? Think about it. Really think about it. What belief are you holding onto not because the evidence supports it, but because abandoning it would be psychologically expensive? What assumption are you making because examining it would require you to change something about how you live, work, or see yourself? Maybe it's something political, a conviction about how the world works that perfectly aligns with your tribal identity. Maybe it's something personal, a belief about your capabilities, your relationships, or your future that protects you from having to take difficult action. Maybe it's something professional, an assumption about your industry, your career path, or your expertise that keeps you comfortable but limits your growth. Maybe it's something deeper, a fundamental belief about human nature, justice, or meaning that you've never seriously examined because the alternative would be too unsettling. Whatever it is, I want you to write it down. Not here in the comments. Yet, just for yourself. Write down one belief you hold that you suspect might be more about psychological comfort than actual truth. Now here's what I want you to do. Spend the next week actively seeking out the strongest challenges to that belief. Not weak objections or strawman arguments, but the most sophisticated, thoughtful critiques you can find. Read them with the same openness you want someone to have when considering your own ideas. If your belief survives this process, if you can engage honestly with the best counter-arguments and still find your position compelling, then you can hold it with much greater confidence. You've earned the right to believe it, but if the process changes your mind, even a little bit, then celebrate. You've just done something that most people are too scared to do. You've grown. You've demonstrated the intellectual courage that separates thinking beings from biological robots. And then, this is the crucial part, share that growth. Write in the comments below about a belief you've questioned or changed your mind about. It doesn't have to be recent, and it doesn't have to be dramatic. It could be something small, something personal, something that nobody else would even notice. The point isn't to impress anyone or signal how open-minded you are. The point is to normalize the process of changing your mind, to show other people that intellectual humility is a strength, not a weakness. To demonstrate that real confidence comes not from never being wrong, but from being willing to discover when you are. Because here's what I've learned, admitting you were wrong about something doesn't make people think less of your intelligence. It makes them trust your judgment more. It shows that your beliefs are held for reasons, not just convenience or social pressure. If this video has challenged even one assumption you hold, if it's made you question even one belief you took for granted, then hit that like button, not because you agree with everything I've said, but because you value the kind of content that makes you think rather than just confirming what you already believe. Share this video with someone who isn't afraid to have their mind changed. Send it to that friend who loves a good intellectual debate, that family member who's always questioning conventional wisdom, that colleague who makes you think harder about your own assumptions. But more importantly, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, someone who's been captured by viral stupidity, someone who's lost in an echo chamber, someone who's forgotten that changing your mind is a sign of growth, not failure. The algorithms that control what content gets seen are designed to promote outrage and confirmation bias. They bury thoughtful, challenging content because it doesn't generate the same level of engagement as tribal warfare and emotional manipulation, but we can fight back. Every like, every share, every thoughtful comment sends a signal that there's an audience for content that promotes intellectual courage over intellectual comfort. Every time you choose to engage with ideas that challenge you rather than just validate you, you make it a little more likely that others will encounter that same challenge. This is how we build immunity against viral stupidity, not through censorship or force, but through creating better information environments. Environments where truth is more engaging than lies, where nuance is more rewarded than extremism, where changing your mind is celebrated rather than mocked. The future of human rationality isn't determined by technology companies or government policies, although those matter. It's determined by choices made by individuals like you. One decision at a time, one conversation at a time, one willingness to be wrong at a time. So tell me, what belief are you ready to examine? What assumption are you willing to question? What idea are you brave enough to doubt? Write it in the comments. Like this video if it's made you think. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Subscribe if you want more content that challenges rather than comforts. But most importantly, carry the spirit of intellectual courage into your daily life. Question your assumptions. Seek out disconfirming evidence. Change your mind when the evidence warrants it. Because in a world infected by viral stupidity, the willingness to think clearly isn't just a personal virtue, it's a form of resistance. And we need all the resistance we can get. The virus of ignorance is spreading, but so is the antidote of wisdom. Which one will you choose to spread?